All right, hello everyone, and thank you for tuning in once again to the Black Box Podcast. BBOR, Black Box Online Radio. Well, it is official now. Marianne Williamson has announced her candidacy for the President of the United States for the 2020 general election to challenge Donald Trump, as well as a host of others during the Democratic primary. And that's right, she'll be running as a Democrat this time. Like many other people, I first heard about Marianne Williamson while she was on the campaign trail in California, running for the representative seat of the 33rd District. But at that time, she was running as an independent, and now she'll be running, of course, on the Democratic ticket. Marianne Williamson is someone whom I'm glad is in the race, and I'm going to say this, just for a few reasons. First, she represents the kind of spiritual, eco conscious, earth love side of the Democratic Party. And I don't really think that that's something that gets represented too much. And we talked about this a little bit during the Tim Ryan uploads. I did two uploads on Tim Ryan, the congressman from Ohio's 13th district, where we mentioned about how he wrote the book A Mindful Nation, talking about teaching mindfulness in schools. He's also an advocate for yoga, talking about how he wants to win the yoga vote. Well, Marianne Williamson is a lot like that, but she's a little bit more charismatic in getting people onto her side, and she's all about sort of non-denominational spiritual practices. And on Wikipedia, they even identified her as a spiritual teacher. But I would say though, when it comes to the progressives, this is something that just often gets overlooked. And really, we need to recognize that there are a lot of progressives out there that do take this sort of eco-conscious environmental earth love side of the issues very seriously. And it's just something that's been overlooked in the past when it comes to the Democratic primaries. Yeah, there are people who talk about global warming and climate change. Yes, there are people who say that we need to do something about big oil. But to actually sort of recognize how spiritual things have influenced you as a person, it's not so much that Marianne Williamson's things are about like you have to become a spiritual practitioner in my way, evangelism. No, it's more like when we're talking about her presidential campaign, and I was just on her website, talking more about how they have impacted her as a person and kind of it's sort of building the foundations of moral and ethical character. It's some interesting stuff, and I think that she will contribute greatly to the debates if she makes it that far, because I didn't even get a chance to do an upload about Richard Ojeda, and he's already out of the race. And I was listening to that channel on YouTube, Progressive Voice, and the host was saying that it's a real shame that Richard Ojeda dropped out because he was actually someone that we could have heard a lot from in the debates. Because, talking about things like workers' rights, veteran affairs, and Richard Ojeda was also saying that he was the kind of guy who was going to drive to all 50 states. There would be no flyover country except flying to Alaska and Hawaii. And while he would have been a good voice for workers' rights and veterans' affairs, Marianne Williamson would be a very good voice for environmental activists and people who are very passionate about ecology. And on her website, she has released a political platform, which we can talk about now. It's so much more than just, she's spiritual and yes, she likes to say non denominational prayers, but it's also about things such as some of the issues that we have. Let's talk about it. Here's a big one, and let's start off right off the gun. Reparations for African Americans, a $100 billion plan for reparations for African Americans. Now, that's definitely a controversial issue. I mean, as I said, I would think it's good to hear some conversations about people who are going to be representing part of the progressive side that is often going to be overlooked. But talk about a controversial issue. I'm not saying anything for or against that. It's just you're going to receive a lot of criticism and blowback for that. And if you think that that one's going to be something that people are going to criticize very strongly, $100 billion reparation plan for African Americans, as a result of slavery and dealing with things like post slave syndrome. How about this one? A complete ban on assault rifles and all other semi automatic weapons. The gun control debate in America is something that is very hot and heated. It is something that makes tempers fly, mostly on one side, but what we really want to say about that is just that once again, just another very, very controversial statement. But I was listening to some more things on YouTube. I was even tuning into Secular Talk, and the guy was talking about just how progressives need to just kind of go more toward the progressive side as opposed to just trying to push their politics to the center because that doesn't actually allow for the achievements that they want. I mean, that sounds like a simple statement, but it doesn't seem to happen too much. Both Barack Obama and Bill Clinton, our last two Democratic presidents, moved their politics to the center a fair bit. Like, a fair bit, excuse me. But there's something we can really kind of say about that. Marianne Williamson is talking about something as well. She's talking about the food revolution. She's talking about how the first thing Americans need to do to lower health care costs begins with dieting, eating healthy. I don't mean like going on a weight loss diet. I mean knowing what's eating in your food. And once again, this is something about just sort of conscious eating, because we have some things that she's talking about that are quite similar to other people, such as John Delaney and Tim Ryan. Tim Ryan wrote the book about the real food revolution, which we discussed on this channel. And John Delaney had a big thing to say about housing costs, where it's like, if you improve the conditions in which people are living in, they're going to get sick less often. That is going to lower the healthcare costs in America. Marianne Williamson is saying almost the exact same things about dieting and nutrition. Tim Ryan has also talked about that, just the entire scape of how our food industry, our for-profit food industry, is rising all the healthcare costs, and it is dragging down the economy. Marianne Williamson is addressing that as well. So this is an overwhelming issue when it comes to the Democratic Party. They're talking all about how the only way that we're going to get anywhere when it comes to something such as health care or housing, or just all of these things, is that if we identify where the problem starts. The only way that we're going to get to the kind of achieve a solution is if we can sort of see whether or not we can lower the cost, improve the conditions so people don't get sick more often. This is a philosophy that has been expanded out through the Democratic Party. Once again, Marianne Williamson, John Delaney, and Tim Ryan have all made very bold statements about this. Tim Ryan wrote a whole book about it. You know, is Marianne Williamson someone who actually has a legitimate chance of winning? Before I say anything, what I would say is that she campaigned very hard for the 33rd District in California when she was running as an independent. She was somebody who really put herself out there, and she just said she tried very hard, but it didn't happen. Well, then, can she take the presidency? It's very difficult for independents to kind of get into the political world because, I mean, we don't really have that many independents in Congress, the House, or Senate. Obviously, Republicans and Democrats are dominating the field, so that's the first thing. Of course, you do have some people like Bernie Sanders and Angus King who can get in. But also, Marianne Williamson was running in California, which is one of the most fought over states in the entire country. When I was listening to a lecture slash presentation once, it was from Lincoln Chafee, the former presidential candidate and senator slash governor from Rhode Island. And somebody asked, how do we get into politics? How do we start off? And he gives some suggestions about, oh, well, you should try and join, some boards in your local community. And somebody responded to that by saying, well, I'm from California, and that's just not going to work. Like, in California, there are just too many people who are fighting to get into the political world. And there are some things to say about that. California has 38 million people, which Marianne Williamson was running once again for the 33rd district. I mean, California has at least, how many districts now? What is it, like 52 or something like that? But don't quote me on that. That's just a guess. But it's just like, it's very, very competitive, and it's just a very competitive world. So should we hold that against her, that she was unsuccessful to become a congressperson? I've talked about that on this channel before when we're looking at some of the presidential issues about Beto O'Rourke as well as Andrew Gillum. They're talking about they want these guys to run for the presidency, and Beto O'Rourke lost his Senate race against Ted Cruz. Andrew Gillum lost the governor's race in Florida. So if they didn't win those, why should they run for the presidency? Well, I think it's going to come down to ideas. And this is the primary. Bear in mind that this is still the primary. And once again, I think Marianne Williamson has a different brand of politics that'll be very beneficial for a lot of people to hear. There are people in the world who are enthusiastic for her brand of politics, and just somebody who's going to represent a faction of the Democratic Party that doesn't get a lot of attention and notoriety. On the other hand, I've been on her website, and her campaign website that is, And I'd have to say, though, that, her background is in, as we said, spiritual teacher, lecturer, political activist. And I think her background as a lecturer might hold her back a little bit when it comes to something such as how she's presenting her material on the website. With the gun control page, she just had straight bullet points, this, and this. When it comes to something such as Social Security, just rambling, and rambling. And I'm just like, hey, come on, get right to the issue. What do you want to do with Social Security? And there is one sentence in there saying that she wants to raise the cap, and as well as healthcare, rambling. I'm like, hey, I don't need 1,000 words. I need to know, are you for or against Medicare for all? Because there are two things that we need to say about the Democrats right here and there. It is that with the Democrats, a lot of people were being very critical of them for not really kind of being on the same page with healthcare. They're talking about Medicare for all, single payer, universal, and people are like, you need to just have a very solid plan for the entire party. What is the phraseology that you're going to use? What is the terminology that you're going to use? What is the name of this plan that you have concocted that you want to bring to the entirety of the nation, because you have all your different representatives running using different terms, as well as people like John Delaney, who we've mentioned before, about how he's talking about having a public health care system with a private buy-in. And the problem with that is the voters aren't listening. It's not resonating with the voters. They aren't really connecting in a way that where they're actually being able to follow the discussion. So it's like, are you for or against Medicare for all? That's what we need to know from Marianne Williamson. Just put it in big, bold letters. And when it comes to Social Security, she's talked about raising the cap. Once again, long, rambling page, but there's one line in there when she says she supports raising the cap on Social Security. However, though, I mean, of course, that's a good idea. Bring it on, right? But without specifics. She doesn't say how much. Richard Ojeda was also questioned by this by David Pakman when he asked him, like, well, if you're in favor of raising the cap on Social Security, how high would you want to raise it? And Ojeda's response was, well, how much money can you make? And in short, I don't think he's thought about it too much. The Social Security is something that the Democrats have also achieved some sort of schism on that. You have like this kind of school of thought that said that Ronald Reagan was right in the 1980s to double the Social Security tax, and where people were going to be paying into the system for themselves and for their parents for a generation or for a period of time. So that created kind of a larger surplus in the Social Security Trust Fund. Marianne Williamson has even talked about that a little bit on her website. But the other school of thought within this sort of Democrat slash progressive circle is that Reagan should have on mix of wage earners. What he should have done was just raise the cap to, sort of an unlimited amount, where you can sort of examine this in the sense that, what are we talking about? $500,000, $1 million, unlimited? Because right now, if I recall correctly, the cap on Social Security is only at $110,000. Like you're only paying into the system up until the $110,000. So there definitely seems to be a very, very large discussion about raising the cap on Social Security in our present day, which Marianne Williamson does support, but without specifics. Like, what are you talking about? Raising it to $170,000? Or do you want to go all the way up to 1 million, 2 million? Gotta have some more specifics on there. Because it really is something that we can just kind of explore as American citizens and try to know what is going on. So, in short, I'm quite curious to do a little bit more reading about what Marianne Williamson would have to say about foreign policy, especially on things like North Korea, Afghanistan and Iraq, Syria. I mean, is she going to be making some very bold statements about these things? I am somewhat impressed that she does have a detailed platform, and I would encourage people to visit her website, Marianne Williamson, and like just see what she has to say. I think that once again, this is going to be very nice to hear her answers in the debate stage because this is a primary and we want to hear different points of view. That's why Richard Ojeda shouldn't have dropped out as early as he did. And I hope Marianne Williamson doesn't follow suit with that, thinking that the sort of Richard Ojeda logic that I'm not going to win this. It's not right of me to take money from donors if there's no chance that I'm going to win. I don't even necessarily think that that's the case anymore. First of all, the general public is fairly aware that if so many of these candidates are running, it is only to raise ideas and bring them to the podium. It's to share their platform with the country. A lot of people are aware of that. And what does that mean for us? Well, that means that this is your chance. This is your chance to share what you have to say. And it's like Marianne Williamson would probably do a very good job in the debates. So I hope she doesn't drop out because she is one of the few candidates that can really share that sort of eco-conscious perspective. Tim Ryan called it the yoga vote, and I really don't like that name because it sounds kind of not very inclusive. It sounds like, it doesn't sound like something that's designed to include everybody into the discussion. When it comes to something like this, we can just sort of look at it as kind of the progressive activists or something, or the progressive spiritual side, or the eco conscious side, or the progressive environmental vote. We could even call it something like that. That's just a name, like whatever sort of name would be a little bit more suitable than the yoga vote. But in short, Marianne Williamson really seems like she's going to be covering a lot of these issues, and perhaps she'll be somewhat more charismatic than somebody such as Tim Ryan, even though, if you can't tell, I am somewhat a fan of him. Now, again, I hope she stays in until the debates, and I hope that people will take her seriously. I'm really thinking that the mainstream media will probably not give her too much coverage. They don't seem to give too much coverage to Andrew Yang anymore. And even on like the Wikipedia page, Andrew Yang and Marianne Williamson were dropped into the minor candidates or something like that. Or they're just put in the other box, I believe. They had like major candidates listing Elizabeth Warren and Kamala Harris, but then they dropped Andrew Yang and Marianne Williamson down into the other box, even though Andrew Yang has been on the ground since 2017. The short story is, I mean, do I really think that Marianne Williamson, this author and political activist, spiritual teacher and lecturer, is going to win the Democratic nomination? At present, no, I do not, but it's like anything is possible. If the host of The Celebrity Apprentice can become president, then, someone who is sharing ideas probably can do it as well. And one of the big things that she puts on her website is talking about how what she's trying to say is that she's sharing a vision of moral ethics and character about things that she's studied in the past and that she wants to kind of bring to the national stage and to talk about this in a wider conversation. Marianne Williamson was also somebody that they really talked about having as a running mate for Bernie Sanders in 2016, where they were, by they, I mean people in the comments sections on various platforms, they were writing a lot that Sanders Williamson 2016, and you would see this, pop up on YouTube videos and Facebook comments and things of that nature. And I was like, I mean, she's definitely somebody who contributes a different brand of politics to the equation. And that is what the Democrats need to be doing. They need to be looking at this from an example of, do we want to keep recycling the same old, same old? Do we need to keep recycling the same old people who are saying the same old bland ideas? Or do we want to step outside the box in the primaries? It's why it's a good thing that Andrew Yang is running and talking about universal basic income. It's why it's a good thing that John Delaney even mentioned about, trying to lower healthcare costs by improving housing conditions if he has his little plan for that. And it's also a good reason why if Tim Ryan, if he enters the race, talks about his books, A Mindful Nation and The Real Food Revolution. Marianne Williamson is talking about some very similar ideas. And once again, it's a shame Richard Ojeda dropped out so he couldn't contribute more to the conversation. I just want to hear different ideas. This is a primary. Once again, we might have 25 to 30 candidates running in the Democratic primary. It's really not going to be a lot of speaking time. Could you imagine if they're going to do 3 tiers of debates? The top card, the undercard, and the middle card? 30 candidates or something? I predict that other people will start dropping out of the race after a certain amount of time. Maybe John Delaney will not even make it that far. But anyway, I'm very glad that Marianne Williamson is going to be part of the presidential race, and we can have a few more conversations about her platform. And I encourage everyone once again to visit her website and talk more about Williamson 2020. Once again, I'm not putting this out like this is some endorsement for her. It's more like I want to kind of know more about what not only what she has to say, but how will she be received by the Democratic Party and their voters. Let's have a few more conversations.